much, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Mike has said, thank you for joining us on the National Education Union's all members Zoom call this afternoon. As your president, I hope you have managed some rest. I understand that last term and the term before have been some very difficult times, and many of you have faced uncertainties, so many changes, not just in your professional lives, but also personally as well. To say this is an unprecedented pandemic is literally an understatement in the world of education. And so thank you very much for not only joining us, but all that you have done up to this point. We hope you find this call really helpful with how we move on going forward in September and into the autumn term. But before I introduce your panelists today, I'm just going to explain some housekeeping. So yes, my name is Amanda Martin and I'm the National Education Union President. We are recording this, so we'll be able to post it for other people to see that aren't able to make it, but also so that we can use your questions and your comments in the information that we produce on our website and on the information that goes out to you. It's really important for us to take in those comments. So everything will be saved. There is a behaviour code that has been posted in the chat. Please have a look at that and make sure that you adhere to that throughout this Zoom call this afternoon. And as Mike said, we are in webinar format, so you won't see yourselves, but you will be able to see the panellists and the signer that's been mentioned already. We do want you to join in, and already so many of you, and I love watching it as it comes through the chat with people saying hello and introducing themselves. Feel free to continue to do that, make comments on what people are saying, but also in that chat, we will post links of things that Kevin will draw your attention to, or that Jane will mention as we're going forward. And if you need any technical support, please write that in there as well, because the tech team will help you. The other way you can join in is by clicking on the Q&A button. We've already got some questions rolling in, and with up to 5,000 of you being on this call, we expect there to be many, many questions, and we will do our very best to get through as many of those as we can. Running those questions today are our brilliant tech team: Lawson Armstrong, Dave Pike, Mary Burton, Vin Wynn, Mike Jocelyn and Henry Fowler, and they will be sorting out your questions and passing to me as the chair. Our signer today is Sam Riddle, so thank you so much to Sam, who's been on so many of these calls and made it accessible for those that need a signer. It's been really, really good. So firstly, I'm going to introduce today, your panelist is Kevin Courtney, one of your General Secretaries. He will be joined later in the questions and answers sections by Jane Phillips, who is Head of Employment Rights Unit in the National Education Union. And Kevin's going to give you an overview of September, pay, what we can win, and also a little information around the A-levels and what we as a union have been doing, because we have been working really hard on your behalf and on the union's behalf and on the pupils that we teach and work with behalf over the summer holidays. So without further ado, Kevin, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Amanda, and thank you very much as our president for chairing this call. I know this is likely to be your last Zoom call in your role as president, and you have played a fantastic role in this. And thank you to everybody who's joined the call. We have more than 5,000 members registered this afternoon. These are astonishing numbers, and it really matters what any of you members have been doing during this pandemic to keep our society going and to keep our schools safe. My friend Mary Bousted sends her greetings to you this afternoon. She's not on the panel. We've normally done these together, but Mary's directly taking issues up with government this afternoon. And I do hope that all of you on the call have had some restful break across the summer, because there is no doubt that this term is going to be hard work and difficult, and that there are going to be twists and turns. We have very many members who are desperate to be back at work, and we have others, and sometimes the same people, who are also extremely concerned about their personal safety or the safety of loved ones. And I think we have a government that has so far not shown itself to be in control of the virus. So we have to deal with the situation as it is. We should continue to be proud of the work that we did last term and since last March, all of us, which kept schools and staff safer and kept our NHS running by looking after those key worker children. We kept schools closed while virus levels reduced and test, track, trace at least got started. And it's true that the virus levels now are currently much lower than they were in March and April. And that does make things safer than then. but that's not uniform across the whole country, and I want to return to that. But because the virus levels are lower, the balance of risks has therefore shifted, both in reality and in the public consciousness. There are now large numbers of people who are worried about their jobs with the effect of the continuing shutdown. There are many parents with children at home since March who are really concerned about the impact on them. Public Health England is supporting the government guidance on reopening schools more widely, and so it's clear that the vast majority of schools will open in September, and we support that. It would be a foolish position for us to advocate that they do not open. We wouldn't succeed, we would look weaker, and it's a position many members don't support. Instead, in these circumstances, it's right for us to be seen as the people who are in favour of education, in favour of schools opening and remaining open, and also the people who are demanding that the government takes every step to make it right. It's also clear that the R rate must not go above 1, or case numbers will increase again. And no matter how irresponsibly our government behaves, they couldn't be satisfied with that, because it will inevitably lead to another lockdown and another closure of the economy. So we also want to be seen as the people who are demanding that the government takes action to stop the R rate being above 1, so that our schools can be open and remain open. We also, and this is vital, we have to be seen as the people who are doing everything they can to keep staff safe. Now, cases are quite low at the moment in much of the country. Nevertheless, there is going to be huge concern about safety, and there's a huge role for us, our workplace reps, our branches, and for members themselves to play in keeping all of us safer. National averages always hide significant regional variation, and there are individual teachers and support staff who are at much higher risks than the average. So we are the people most concerned about the safety of staff. And there is much in the union that we've been working on across the summer that is just coming to fruition. Early in the first half of September, we are going to be able to publish a website that will look like the School Cuts website that we published before. It will give information about the local COVID case rate in the area of each school in the country. We are working hard right now to get that information to be as local as possible, for it to show the trends in the data in that area, and for it not to be attackable as scaremongering. It won't be scaremongering. We had to do a lot of work on the School Cuts website to make sure that all the figures on there were absolutely reputable. We're doing the same on this. So there's serious work to go on that. You might know, you will know, the government publishes data about cases per 100,000 in whole local authority areas, which we'll publish, but it's not the only data that is now available. The government is now publishing the raw number of new cases in each of around 7,000 what they call medium super output areas. You'll probably get used to hearing that term across the next few weeks. It's good that the government is giving this data. It's much more fine-grained, and it'll be important to all of us, to all of you. I'll return to that information. It's better to think of a medium super output area as a council ward. It's about the same size as that. We've also in the union been working on a suite of documents about school safety in the context of September. And it also deals with what happens if things aren't safe. How do you escalate? Where do you go to next if things aren't right? They are all on the COVID pages of our website now, and they deal with our core concerns about September opening. And in summary, this is a very brief summary of what those documents discuss. We are really concerned that every school, there should be a proper consultation with the union reps and with the staff on the risk assessment. We think that's happening in most schools. It has to happen in every school. Every school has to then have plans in place, the one-way systems in corridors, but satisfactory plans for enhanced overnight daily cleaning has to be there. Plans for appropriate PPE to staff when they're working in close personal contact, for example, with people whose behaviour creates a significant risk, or if they're supervising students who are symptomatic, etc. That every school needs to have conducted individual risk assessments for staff who are clinically extremely vulnerable or clinically vulnerable, including pregnant employees or at increased risk, older staff, disabled staff, black staff. We need individual risk assessments for each one of those members of staff. And we have to ensure that all those staff risk assessed to be clinically vulnerable or higher, the plans in a school have to guarantee 2 meters distancing from other staff, and in secondary schools from the pupils. We want heads to agree that all employees who are clinically extremely vulnerable should continue to work from home in September if they wish to do so. We think there will still be pupils at home. They need support, and we think clinically extremely vulnerable people could be at home supporting them. We're also, at this stage, we need to see that the school has clear contingency plans about how it will protect safety in the event of an in-school outbreak or a spike in the local infection rate. So these are all documents on our website now. They're documents aimed at you, at members, at school reps, and for our branch officers, and all of them are on the Corona pages. And I would really urge you to spend some time familiarising yourself with those documents and talking with other members in your school, and in particular your school rep, about them. If you don't have a school rep, we are again saying, please step forward. We had thousands of new reps who came forward in the last months, and there is real work to do. It's satisfying work, and we would like you to volunteer. We believe the materials that we have on the website can give members confidence. The union is supporting them and can support them. We're trying to do everything we can to work with the other education unions, and Unison and GMB are very likely to use the same guidance as we have. Just want to return to the website I was talking about, the one that will give this data about local cases. We think this will probably be reassuring to most members in most schools. At least at first, it will show, unless the government gets it wrong, it will show relatively low numbers of cases in the ward that your school is situated in. Roughly speaking, there are 25,000 schools in England, and 14,000 of them are in a ward with a COVID rate of 0 last week, where nobody had a COVID, there were no positive COVID cases in that ward in the last week. 85% of schools are in wards with less than 20 cases per 100,000, and that's regarded as a low figure. 95% of schools less than 50 cases per 100,000. But then it's not the same everywhere. There are those 5% of schools in areas with more than 50 cases per 100,000. Inside that 5%, there are 1.5% of schools that are in areas of more than 100 cases per 100,000, and that's regarded as a high figure. And again, within that 5%, there are 0.3% of schools, that's 87 schools, that are in local areas with more than 200 cases per 100,000. Now, I want to be clear, us saying that there are areas where there are low numbers is in no way a suggestion that we shouldn't be concerned in those schools to do everything we can to be our part of keeping the cases down. There are still real concerns. All parts of the checklist, our checklist, have to be followed in every school. Staff have to practice social distancing. We have to encourage students as much as we can. It's not a normal situation anywhere. But the situation in schools in higher rate areas is markedly different, and we are responding to that as well. If we can get our website publicised well enough, and I think it will attract a lot of attention, it will show that the areas where the number of cases is much higher. Now, just knowing the numbers isn't necessarily enough. You do need some local intelligence, and we're asking our branches to engage with the local public health officials and then with reps in schools to talk about what we find from that. So, for example, in one ward in Northampton, this is 3 weeks ago, there were 200 positive cases in that one ward in 1 week alone. That was 20% of all the new cases in the entire country that week. So that's an enormously high case number, and it's a worrying case number. But with some local intelligence, you then know that the vast majority, in fact, I think it was all those cases, were in one sandwich factory, the Marks and Spencer's sandwich factory that's been on the news. So if That sandwich factory is then closed and the workers there are then sent home, paid to be at home, self-isolating, their families self-isolating, then that's less worrying. It's still worrying for those people and for that huge case number, but it's less worrying than if you don't know where those 200 cases come from. So we are going to publish that information, encourage our branches to engage with local councils and Public Health England. You may know, and this is going to be important to all of us, all councils are now being put in one of 4 categories. The highest risk category is called areas of intervention, and that's around 10 councils in the North West and the East Midlands at the moment. Then below that, the tier below that, is areas of enhanced support. These are areas which are at risk of becoming areas of intervention. There's a couple of those at the moment, and Birmingham is the biggest of them. We'll be looking this week to see whether Birmingham moves up to areas of intervention, or whether it stays the same at enhanced support, or whether it moves down to the next area, which is areas of concern. These are areas of higher than average number of cases, and then there's the rest. So all the councils are divided up into those areas. We're asking our branches to make sure they're talking to public health officials and talking to the reps about what's going on in there. And we have been pressing the government this week, before this week, but in meetings with Gavin Williamson this week, that there has to be real detail on further action in schools. For example, the possibility of rota operation, etc., in those areas of intervention in particular. If they can't find other ways of getting the case numbers falling, they're going to have to do things in that space. And we've been pressing and talking with local council leaders about the fact that the government needs to get that sort of guidance out. So we're asking branches to engage. We want you to stay in touch with your school rep about that. If there isn't a school rep, we want you to become a school rep. We think that you have to imagine that with this pattern of local variation, it will mean that in some of those higher risk areas where the cases are higher, that there's likely to be more parents who will keep their children at home in those areas because of those risks. And in that case, it'll be easier to win the argument that more vulnerable staff should also be at home supporting those children. So we want to protect staff in every part of the country, but we do have to look at the differences in those areas and fine tune around those questions. And we'll be pressing local decision makers on that, including head teachers in some of those intervention areas. And if those intervention areas don't have measures in hand that will reduce the number of cases, then you're likely to get to the situation that Leicester was in just before the summer holidays, where there did have to be some targeted closure of schools. So I know there are loads of questions. I see them coming in. I would urge, we won't be able to answer every question, so we are asking you to go to your rep and to the advice line. But in general, I want you to look at our materials on our website. I want you to talk to your workplace rep about our checklist. What's missing, what's done on our checklist. If you don't have a rep, to volunteer to become the rep. You can just be it for the COVID thing, just look at our checklist. If our core safety concerns on the checklist are not adequately met, I want you to talk to your rep about sending checklist letter 2. That's on the website. It's a letter to your head, very politely phrased, but raising the issues that we think aren't met. I want you to talk to your rep about feeding checklist concerns back to other members with a particular focus on the anxieties of clinically extremely vulnerable, clinically vulnerable and higher risk members. A union is all about collectivity, all of us standing together, and those of us who are at less risk, standing with those who are at more risk to say, look, Head, surely this person who's clinically extremely vulnerable, they could be at home supporting the kids who are at home. We can find ways of sharing out the workload, because otherwise the head will be asking you to do some work supporting the kids who are at home. So it works around both ways. We want you as a member to tell your rep about things you see around the school that aren't as COVID secure as they could be. If you spot something that could be improved, so not in a spirit of carping, but in a spirit of constantly trying to get things as right as we can, we want the rep to be able to go to their head on a weekly basis and say, oh, the hand sanitizers run out there. We really have to improve the process on that. Oh, the one-way system is breaking down in this corridor. We really need to look at that. All those sorts of things. We have to be on those all the time. We want you to support your workplace rep. They need your support as members in meeting with the school or college leadership to address any outstanding safety concerns. And in a minority of cases where the head doesn't work with us, to escalate up to the branch or to the region and Wales office. Now, none of us in the NEU, not me, not Mary, not our regional secretaries, not Amanda, none of us believe that we are wise enough at this stage to know exactly how everything is going to develop. The union is going to have to work together. We're going to have to share our experiences through all of this. We're going to have to keep on top of it, but we have shown during this crisis that we are capable of keeping on top of it. And we really need your engagement. We're really pleased you're on this call now. We want to keep on top of all of this. And that can mean further demands on the government depending on how things are going. We wanted them to introduce our 10-point plan for education recovery of recruiting more teachers and finding more teaching spaces because we've got the highest class sizes in the country. We're going to be pressing them on having more availability of testing, more availability of the appropriate PPE, and crucially on the actions that they're going to have to take, especially in schools in higher rate areas if the cases are still going up. We think the right general line is we want schools to be open. And we think having that as our general line, it gives us much more purchase if things are going wrong in particular areas or for particular people, for us to argue for the alternative. So we were right to close for schools, to call for schools to close in March when it was clear the virus was out of control. We were right to do that. We were right to say that we only wanted schools to be open last term, and we were right to publish our 5 tests. Those 5 tests, it's true, have not been fully met. Progress has been made on all of them, but they're not fully met. We do think schools should open in September, following the hard work our society has done to get the virus level down. But it is absolutely clear that the government has responsibilities. It has to keep the virus under control. It has to keep the R below 1. It has to protect vulnerable staff. It has to deal with the situation in schools in areas of higher incidence. So we're going to be on the back of the government, demanding that with you, with your support at all times. They have to commit to studying what happens in schools as schools open, to looking at the regulations and amending them in order to keep you and our society safe in this situation. We want the government to be much clearer about what's going to happen in those areas of high intervention. Now, thank you for listening to that. I know that people have joined because of that COVID and safety, but I would really appreciate it if you just let me say a couple of words about pay and about exams, because we've been doing lots of work on these issues and they are really important for members as well. The government announced a teacher pay rise in September, in the back end of the summer. There's also a support staff pay rise coming, but there was the teacher pay rise was announced and hasn't yet been implemented. So these words are just about that. It's really important to know that pay rise was nothing to do with COVID, despite the way some spin was put on it. It was a pay rise that had been a year in the discussing. Me and Mary and Amanda had given evidence to the school teacher pay review body. And so it's a year in coming. And now there is a new set of pay figures. And we have agreed with the 2 largest head teacher organisations. We have many heads in membership, but with ASCL and NAHT, a common pay spine that is the government pay spine, but we are recommending it to every school. The NEU is printing that as a big poster format. We're sending it out to schools, so look for it on your school notice board. We have also agreed with NAHT and ASCL to advise all schools which are paying below the advisory points. You will know that we used to have M1, M2, M3 up to M6, and you'll know that the government got rid of M2, M4, M5 and just said schools can do what they want. We have managed to get the government to go back to having advisory points. They're not quite mandatory, but they are advisory, and NAHT, ASCL and us have issued advisory points to all schools and also told schools paying below those points to move up immediately to paying them. If it's a school, and there are a small number, which are paying more than those points, we've said the teachers should get the appropriate percentage pay rise, not be scaled back. And we will be launching activities to school reps, asking them to just approach the head and seek confirmation that all of that is going to go forward in schools. And also, and we think this is crucial as well, that people shouldn't be held back on pay progression because of COVID. We're saying that everyone should make pay progression this year. We've got given one tiny exception. If somebody was on a capability procedure before COVID, then in some cases, maybe they won't make the pay progression. We'd still argue that they should, but we're not saying it's compulsory. But we think that everybody else should make it. We are getting success in some MATs in getting them to drop performance-related pay altogether. And we've had a few more say they're going to do that. The latest was Elliott. And just a couple of words on exams, because you'll have seen the work that we were doing over the summer period, the fiasco over A-level grades. Mary doing much of this work of getting out there in the media and explaining our concern about the fiasco over A-level grades. We think that what happened this summer, and GCSE grades as well, is not an aberration, as a revelation of how poorly the process works. The one person who should resign is staying put, senior civil servants falling on their swords behind them. Because it was Gavin Williamson and Nick Gibb who told Ofqual that their main consideration should be stopping grade inflation, and that meant that their second direction, that students should get fair grades, couldn't happen because there weren't enough good grades left to go round once the small centres had been given their grades. Boris Johnson, on the day of the results, called the algorithm robust and dependable, and 2 days ago, he changed his mind and called it mutant. You really couldn't make up the scale of this. But we're not looking backwards. I mean, there's all those huge concerns for the young people involved in this and for their teachers, but we have to look forwards. So we are doing two things. Your union is establishing a commission, not of union members. We'll have some union members on it, but we're getting experts on assessment to look at secondary assessment. We are going to do good work on this. We're going to get it out in stages before the summer to try and influence the debate, because we are really worried that it could go wrong again like this next year. And secondly, to support the work of that commission, we have a petition which has now over 55,000 signatures calling for the government to reduce the syllabus content of GCSEs and A-levels for next year. We want students to be assessed on the work they've been taught, not on the work they haven't been taught. And we think it'll be profoundly discriminatory between schools because, you know, some private schools have been able to carry on with Zoom lessons during the period of closure and covered far more content, and it'll just be unfair in the results if we don't get a reduction. And we're also, in our petition, calling on the government to work with teachers and school leaders to develop a robust national system of moderated centre assessed grades in case there is disruption to exams next summer because of a second spike or local lockdowns. And we want them to set up a commission as well. So like I say, safety, our big concern, but pay and what happens to our students in our exams and their teachers in the exams, also really vital. So please do ask members in your school, please do sign that petition yourself and ask other members in your school to sign it. We are also taking up the case of the SATs, which we think shouldn't run next May. We think they'll be really unfair if they do. And I just want to end by saying our strength in our union has always been engagement of members. So I'll just say again, do stay coming on the calls as we have them. Please do consider volunteering to be a rep. Be involved in your local school meetings. The union's strength is the engagement of its members. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Quite a lot of information there, and we've got hundreds of questions coming in. So I'm going to kick straight off with the first four. So Una has asked, should 100 staff meeting in a hall where there will not be social distancing? So that's talking about staff meetings. Had a lot on staff meetings. Is there any advice on marking books? That's from Lucy in Wiltshire. Pauline asks, can I choose to wear, and we've had quite a lot of questions on this, can I choose to wear a mask if my school has a policy not to wear them? And Kathy says, when will teachers, and obviously we have more than just teachers in our union, so teachers, support staff and any members of the National Education Union and in our school environments, be tested regularly, any chance of antibody testing?
Thank you. Those are 4 important questions. So, and I'll say something and Jane may add to it. So on the question of staff meetings, we think that physical staff meetings in the same room should not be happening. We think it's very difficult to promise social distancing in situations where people are being expected to speak out loud. You know, there was the public health study that they did into the school opening last summer that had some media attention last weekend. It said there's 25,000 schools, 24,000 schools. It said there were only 30 outbreaks. It was saying that was a small number of outbreaks, although there were caveats put in the report that didn't get as much attention, saying obviously schools weren't very open then. So there might be more outbreaks. Outbreaks are more than two or more cases. So some of those outbreaks very small. There were 30 outbreaks, but half of them were staff to staff transmission. So, you know, the fact that your teachers or support staff doesn't make you immune from having the virus, from having it possibly without symptoms, and then from spreading it to other people. So the union is going back to work, but we aren't having meetings of our staff in the same room. If we're having a staff meeting, we're doing it on Zoom from the office spaces or working from home. So physical meetings really shouldn't be happening because of that risk of staff-to-staff transmission, which if the virus then spreads in the school's in a much worse situation. So we'd say no to physical meetings. Now, the question of marking books, the advice on this is about the chance of the virus being on something that you are getting from a child. So there is we also need to think about marking in terms of workload. And there was a lot of stuff going on about marking before the lockdown, with many government bodies starting to say we're doing far too much of this marking and we've got to find ways of cutting back on it. So let's bear that in mind as well. But if you are marking physical books, there has to be a quarantine system. The books have to be given in and then they have to be left untouched. And I think we're saying 72 hours, whatever the scientific advice is. The advice is on the website, but there has to be an isolation period for the books. The virus does die on these surfaces over those sorts of lengths of time. On masks, our position is that we are, you may have heard us talking on the media about it this week, so I won't just answer the bit here that's been asked, I'll say some more about it. We think the government has to follow the science, follow the best science. The World Health Organization is saying that in areas of higher transmission, that children over 12 should wear masks in the communal areas. The government eventually adopted that position. The World Health Organization also said that staff at higher risk, and they said staff over 60, about 2% of teachers are age 60 or over. The World Health Organization said teachers or support staff aged over 60 or people who are otherwise vulnerable should be wearing a medical grade mask. And we've asked the government to look at that and to give advice on the basis of that. They haven't yet done so. We are saying about individuals who want to wear masks that we think if they want to wear them, they should be allowed to wear them. So we would back you if you want to wear a mask in wearing it. We're saying in schools that are not in the high risk areas that we, at the moment, our position is in a secondary school, not in a high risk area, that the government is saying it's up to head teachers. We're saying we don't like that. Head teachers aren't the public health experts. We would rather the government had a clear position on it. But if our members in a school think, and there is a difficulty about this, we get competing views from members. We have some members saying we should be advocating for every child in every school, every secondary school in the corridors to be wearing masks, and others saying they just don't think it will make any difference. So we're saying, if you think the corridors are okay in your school and you don't want to press for masks, then don't press for masks. If you think it's a bit chaotic, if you think the kids are not chaotic, if you think that your school's corridors aren't very wide, that your one-way systems aren't very good, that you think mask wearing would be a good thing for children outside school, outside the classroom, then we'd support a school group in taking that up with the head teacher. people might have more questions, happy to come back to that. And the last question, when are we going to have a decent testing regime? And the second question was about antibody testing. Now, the science on antibody testing, as I understand it, although I might not be completely up to date, is people are worried about the accuracy of the antibody testing, that it might not tell you that accurately whether you've got it. And then also, there's only that one case so far, but there's this one confirmed case from Hong Kong in the last couple of days of somebody being able to have the virus twice. So even if the antibody tests told you you had it, that doesn't mean that you might not get it again. So, but we want, I think it would be good if we had antibody testing, having said all that, because it would give some degree of reassurance and some sense of where the virus has been. But we are pressing for the best testing regime to be available. And hearing Nick Gibbs say they've sent 10 home test kits to every school, no matter what size the school is, that doesn't really give us the confidence that the government is on top of that as much as we want them to be. So we want to hear from you. If if there's anybody getting symptoms, they need to be able to get tested. That needs to happen quickly. We need to get the results back quickly. And then other people in the school if there's a positive test, other people in the school need to be able to be tested quickly as well. So we're going to keep on top of that issue of testing.
Thank you, Kevin. Jane, anything to add to what Kevin has just said?
Yes, I would just say to Una that meeting of 100 staff and no social distancing, look at our checklist. Our checklist deals with the 2 metre social distancing. That's in line with DFE guidance that staff should be, as much as possible, keeping 2 metres away from each other. It applies equally to any staff meetings. Lucy's question about books, I agree with Kevin that should be 72 hours. This isn't a legal point, it's a practical point that my local library does that with books that people pick up from the shelf, let alone borrow and return. So that would seem to be a sensible approach. And the other thing I'd say about the issue of masks that Pauline said is, what the government guidance is that if you can't maintain 2 metres, it's a 1 metre plus, and 1 metre plus means 1 metre plus any other measure, i.e. face masks. So as Kevin said, if there's communal areas that nobody is able to maintain 2 metre distancing, you should be able to wear face masks if you want to, and you should be, in my view.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got some more.
Amanda, I've just looked in the chat, and I know I shouldn't do that, but somebody asked, what about on the marking question, what about if you're being asked to mark literacy, numeracy books daily? I think we have to say to head teachers, this is not education as normal. We are in the midst of a pandemic which has proved deadly to 40,000 people. And so a new regime needs to be worked out about marking, because you should not be expected to take books in from children and then return them the next day without that period of quarantine. The government's really clear in some of the guidance, like around PE equipment, about quarantining the equipment between uses, because there is a risk of the virus being spread by that route, and every school has to play its part in trying to keep the case numbers down. So that daily marking shouldn't be happening in that way.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thank you, Jane. Just to say, we've got thousands of you on the call and we've got hundreds of questions coming in, so we're trying to bundle them up into lots of the areas that we're covering. The NEU has nearly 500,000 members, and we realise that you work in different establishments, nurseries, schools, colleges, but also in different sectors, and we are putting on sector Zooms as we go forward into the term for sector specific, so sixth form, supply, support, and the independent sector. And we also realise we might not be able to answer your questions in full detail, so there is the advice line, and I'll talk about that right at the end. I'm going to go into some more questions straight away. So Amanda has asked, not me, will the National Union share with reps a suggested guide for collectivising issues? For example, when a workplace management refuses to allow vulnerable members to work from home. We need a national lead on this with clear guidance on how those union groups can take action and on how members can use Section 44 to protect themselves. Helen has asked, Hi, can you tell me how we can challenge risk assessments? Charlotte has asked, I'll be an NQT. We've had lots of NQT and first year teacher questions coming in September. I'm feeling anxious, extremely anxious about going back to school. The last time I taught at the start of March. How can I prepare and how can I do my very best and hope schools support me? And have you any further advice for me and other NQT colleagues? And Hannah has asked, I'm due to start teacher training in September. Do you know how COVID will affect this?
Another 4 fantastic questions. Amanda's question, we have that suggested guide for collectivising issues. It's on the website, it's in the COVID areas of the pages, and we had a call with reps yesterday specifically talking about collectivising those issues, and a call before that with branch officers talking with them about it. So yeah, absolutely, we think these issues are best dealt with collectively. Amanda raised though the question of the use of section 44. Section 44 you may have heard of, and it can allow, it does allow workers not to go into unsafe places, and it gives them protections against going into unsafe places. The way the law is written around it says you can't go in somewhere if you have a reasonable belief that you'd be protected if you had a reasonable belief that the workplace was unsafe I can't remember the specific words. You have to have a reasonable belief that it's an imminent and serious danger to health. And we, in the summer, were advocating that the use of that could happen in a number of circumstances, and it still can happen in circumstances now. So Jane gave an example on the call yesterday. If your school management unaccountably said they're stopping cleaning, then we think that there would be a really serious risk, and section 44 could then allow you to say, well, we're not going to be in school then. But we'll have to be a bit careful about the use of it in some other places, because we can't guarantee how it's going to work out. It's an individual right that a member has, that a citizen has, to say, I'm not going to go. But you have to have that reasonable belief. So how will it work when Public Health England are saying it is safe to go back? How will any tribunal looking at that weigh up the fact that Public Health England, the senior public health body in the country, is saying it is safe against you saying it's not safe? So although section 44 is an individual right, we think talking about it collectively in the school, collectivising the issue, is the better way to go. And sometimes in extremis, that will be us saying we're going to ballot for industrial action. And we have done everything we can to shorten the periods for balloting for industrial action. And in practice, we find that if we threaten industrial action, that often gets the solution anyway. So section 44 might not be the easy solution. Collectivising the issues is the way we want to go. Challenging risk assessments. I mean, we are getting some feedback from, it depends what the risk assessment is about, and challenging it with the support of your school rep if you're not the school rep, and sitting down and asking the school rep to go and talk with management about it. Sometimes if it's a question of you being clinically extremely vulnerable, the head says you can be in, then it might be a case of going to your GP, and maybe your GP will support you. It might be that your branch secretary can work with your school rep on finding a challenge to a particular part of the risk assessment. Many head teachers are working well with us on this, but there are always some people who are more difficult than that. And so, somebody who really knows the government guidance, and our branch secretaries will have read it very thoroughly. It's on the website. We'd like you to read it as well, about these things. But sometimes the head's just got something wrong about the guidance. Like if there's a risk assessment saying it's okay to use the gym equipment one class straight after the other, when the government guidance says it isn't, then there's a way of challenging it from that. And the other 2 questions about NQTs and student teachers, and hello to all the NQTs on the call. We have just written to Gavin Williamson, actually asking him some questions about we're starting to hear of a number of people who have just finished their PGC and the BEd or the BEd and haven't managed to find a job. And this seems to be much more than in previous years. And we think that's because other teachers haven't changed jobs. So there's that issue as well, and we're taking that up. But for an NQT, as you said, you had a bit of practice a long time ago in March. You've passed your PGC, you're in school, congratulations, it's a great job. But going in, you've got every right to feel a bit more nervous than other people about being in that class at the first time. And so schools should have a mentor who is allocated to you. That mentor will be feeling under pressure themselves, but they should be giving you some time talking with you about that. We've got some good guides out about your rights as a teacher on your induction period, and they've just been published on our app. There's good guides there. Talk with your mentor and talk with your school rep about it. And Hannah, I was talking to somebody who's running a PGC course this September at the Institute of Education, and there may be, it won't be the teacher training as normal, I think. And they're finding difficulty getting schools to agree to take trainee teachers because of everything else that's going on. So but those people on those courses will be looking for every opportunity for you. And it's not going to be as normal, but do keep coming back to us. You're taking on a good job. It's a job that really matters. And of course, all these concerns for teachers, we've got similar concerns for our support staff members. And there are support staff members who are in the process of just becoming support staff, who have been just starting, and they've missed out on these opportunities as well. And we'll want to press for them to have the same sort of support in school. So whether you're a teacher or a member of support staff, these questions do really matter to us.
Thank you, Kevin. Jane, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Amanda. Helen's question about challenging risk assessments. And to me, it was kind of answered by Amanda's question before that one way to challenge the risk assessment is to collectivise that challenge. And as Kevin mentioned, this time, unlike in June, we are saying there may be occasions where, you should be looking at possible ballot action to take industrial action if those risk assessments are not up to scratch, if they're not complying with everything that should be in place. So, as we've said many times, speak to the rep, your rep if you've got one, speak to the branch, and speak to other members around collectivising those issues.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got some more questions coming in. Sarah's asking, can SLTs walk in and out of all year group bubbles? Another Sarah is asking, and Erica, sorry, that was the same question. Erica is asking, hi, is there any advice about managing workload with regard to teaching students in schools and then preparing and setting work for students shielding or refusing to come in? Carol is asking, it would be good for all schools and early years settings where I work myself to take temperatures of all staff and children every day, and maybe unions could bring this to the schools and nurseries' attentions. Bimla has asked, can you give us an example of what the equalities impact assessment would look like for BAME individuals so we can be more equipped for individual risks assessment, please? And final one in this group, thoughts on a high-risk pregnancy. I'm in my third trimester plus medical conditions. Members have been asking to attend school without an individual risk assessment being completed for the first week, as the head teacher can't get anyone in to complete it for a week, but the member is being asked to come in. So 4 completely different, but also quite a few of those types of questions coming in.
I think I'll say something about the 2 sort of workloady ones first, and then let Jane come in on the maternity and the temperature test, and I might come back on them. And can you do the equalities impact assessment one as well, Jane? So, and then I'll come back on them as well. But on the workload question, we think, Mary and I both think this is going to be an incredibly important question this term. And we have to say it's not education as normal. We have to say we can't do all teaching all day and then remote working for children as well. It's not possible. If we do that, everybody is going to be burnt out. There have to be, and there are, better ways. And the other thing that we think about it is that work for kids who are at home, there is a tie-in between that and the more at-risk staff who could be at home doing that work And so that's two birds with one stone. But we are absolutely clear, workload, teachers and support staff actually, but teachers' workload was unfeasible before COVID. We can't just let it go up as part of responding to COVID. We're all doing everything we can, and being in school is doing everything we can. We can't work all the hours God sends as well as that. So we'll back you in saying that's not the solution, head teacher. We want you to talk with your other members in your school, talk to the rep and get the reps to talk via the branch secretary with other reps, because you'll find there are other schools in your area that are managing this better. And we want to level up to the question of who's doing it best as the best way of arranging it. And the same thing I think applies to SLT dropping in. So, I mean, I don't know really, when you get a question like this, in the webinar format, you can't really get into a dialogue with the person asking it. So yes, the question might be fundamentally about COVID security. And I think it probably is possible for someone to come in, stand at the door and be quite COVID secure, quite a distance from the classroom. Or it might be about the some cases where we hear about SLT who are just really intrusive and going round and checking up on you all the time. And I think this is this isn't the time when SLT should be doing lesson visits, doing reporting on, doing all that sort of policing action. SLT should be there right now at this moment, supporting you. There will be dangers of social distancing going wrong. SLT need to be there to help with those questions. There is more than enough for SLT to be doing without doing the policing actions that sometimes happen.
Thank you very much. Jane, would you come in on the equality impact assessment, maternity and the temperatures, please?
Sure, yes. So I'm going to take those in turn that I can see them on my screen. So Carol, the issue around temperature testing is it's quite difficult because the scientific evidence is that it isn't particularly always a good way of checking whether somebody has or hasn't got COVID-19. It's not particularly reliable. There's additional issues in that some people may record a higher temperature. For example, women sometimes who are going through menopause, they could be showing a higher temperature where there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. So it's not, I'm not sure it's necessarily ideal as a way of trying to sort of control the virus. The question from Bimla around the equalities impact assessment. Bimla, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying. I don't think you need an equalities impact assessment when it comes to BAME individuals and their individual risk assessments. What you need, if you have any difficulties with your employer, is to Google the scientific support which says and sets out those who are deemed to be at higher risk from COVID-19 and its effects. And that should feed into then any individual risk assessment in terms of where your vulnerabilities are and what your employer can do to protect you. And on the website, there is, we've got some detailed guidance for anybody who is clinically extremely vulnerable, clinically vulnerable or high risk. That tells you what you need to know, hopefully. And if you need any more support, then contact Advice Line, contact your branch, and we'll provide you with that support. The pregnancy one, I can't really believe that somebody's in this position, quite frankly. So the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has published advice, and it's advice to all pregnant women who are in a public-facing role, such as teachers and support staff, anybody working in schools, is that they should maintain social distancing wherever possible. And furthermore, if you are in your third trimester, or have an underlying health condition, let alone in your third trimester plus a medical condition, you may well be at greater risk. And so the advice, what I would say to you there is that the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations says that all pregnant women need to have an individual risk assessment. And that would include now dealing with the effects of COVID-19. And if the employer is unable to offer sufficient protection for that pregnant woman, she should be suspended on full pay on the grounds of health and safety. And that failure to do that, in my mind, would justify looking at possibly relying on Section 44 protection. Because the evidence is quite clear. The DFE guidance says that the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology's advice should be followed by schools. It's not at all sufficient for somebody to say that they can't get anybody in to do that risk assessment. That's ridiculous. She should speak to her GP, she should speak to her midwife. If the head continues to be difficult, then she should say that she wants to have a referral to occupational health. And if that doesn't resolve the situation, then she needs to contact us for specific advice sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Can I just come back a little bit? I mean, yeah. Jane's answer there on the maternity thing is absolutely fantastic. And Mari Burton, one of our staff, has just posted lots of resources into the chat group on that. So you can come to the union in a variety of ways. But just to come back on Bimla's question, it's really important. There is this government evidence that black staff are at more risk than others. So twice the risk is the sort of roundabout figure compared with somebody that's just otherwise the same as them. So, you know, a black woman of 30 will be at twice the risk of a white woman of 30. A black man of 60 will be at twice the risk of a white man of 60. And that's vital that your head teacher acknowledges that in a risk assessment that they do about you. And there are resources on our website and letters on our website that you can use if you think that's not going well for you. It's important that those things are raised in properly, and there are resources on the website to deal with them.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, but I've got quite a few questions coming in on around these areas. So I'm going to ask a couple more. Emily asked, do you have any information or recommendations about Ofsted spot checks for how schools are providing catch-up? And education staff are required to clean equipment, mice, keyboards between sessions and various other equipment. What is the minimum protection we should be expecting? Those two first, thanks.
So, thanks. I mean, let's be clear, Ofsted's useless for all of us in this situation. When they are doing the visits that they're doing next term, they are not going to be looking at classrooms. They're not touring the school. They are only talking to SLT. So that's slightly better than it is normally. You won't have any of them in your classroom. But I think it's important at this moment that we do not start behaving, and SLT don't start behaving like we've got to do everything that, you know, Ofsted are coming, let's really cram on the catch up. It's the important thing now is to be telling the truth to Ofsted, that it's going to be difficult, that it's not the situation as normal. And Ofsted hopefully will, for once in their life, be able to do something that's sensible, because, you know, the government's talking about this tutoring scheme to catch up. I think schools aren't going to be able to start doing that for a very long time because of all the COVID security questions. And we can't do everything, and Ofsted should tell the truth about this for once. The cleaning, it's not a teacher's job to clean. And so that has to be our starting position. And I mean, the person asking the question is asking, should there be protection? And, you know, a cleaner should have protection, but you're not a cleaner. And that isn't the way the schools should be dealing with it. The schools should be getting extra cleaning resources in from outside to do the cleaning.
Thank you. Jane, anything further before we conclude?
No, I think Kevin's covered all those very well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for all your questions. We have recorded them all. Kevin and Jane this afternoon and the NEU have talked about all of the things the union are doing and continues to do, but we also know how much you've also done. We know by looking at your messages that many of you do feel supported. And, you know, as your president, it's been really proud to say that I believe we have been on the right side of history. We've protected the NHS and we've saved lives. And we want our schools, our colleges and our nurseries to be open. It's vital that when you go back into your workplace, you look at your risk assessment, not only linked to your own role, but linked to your personal circumstances, and you know what that sits and make sure that affects you. But it's also important that you have open discussions with your colleagues. We've talked around being collective and standing together and making sure that we're all feeling safe in our workplaces. So we can do that. We have proved, and we already know, that our nurseries, our schools, our colleges are at the heart of our communities. And I think this pandemic has shown. I've always said to people that the union should be the family you choose to join. And I think that the NEU is the best family union you could be in. But it's also important, we've looked at some information that's come through today, that you don't do this alone. There is the website, the templates, there's talking to colleagues, there's talking to reps, there's the advice line. Some of you have asked about joining up with local networks, not just about I've got a problem, but how do I get involved? So please do contact on the back of your card. There's an advice line number, but there's also should be your local branch and district, and you'll be able to find out about networks. I know in mine in Portsmouth, we have a network for reps, for leadership, for young members, and for our various equality strands. So it's important that you do go along and get involved. And there's a couple of lists of things that I would like you to be asking you to do. Again, make sure your risk assessment is checked. Have a conversation in school, begin meetings urgently. Do not be afraid to raise something that you have a concern. It's not that you're being a pain in the backside. It's the fact that you are trying to make sure your nursery, your school or your college stays open for as long as possible and in the safest way. And by raising a concern, because there's going to be changes, there's going to be tweaks, that will help do that. You will be paying your part. I want to say thank you very much for all of you for this afternoon's call, and wish you every best of luck. It is still the best profession in the world to be working in. And despite all of this, you will all no doubt be looking forward to at least seeing the smiles on those kids' faces, who maybe many of them haven't seen a smile in the time of this lockdown. So thank you very much for your time.
Can I just get the last word to say thank you to Amanda? It's the last one of these Zooms she's been chairing as our president. She's been fantastic. So thank you very much, Amanda. And thanks, Sam, for the signing as well. But thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone else. Good luck next week. And stay in touch with the union.